I'd like to paint the bigger picture, with regard to why it's important for professional engineers to register quickly and to do it efficiently. It's premised on the role that professional engineers have played, and to date, it's sort of devolved to become a risk requirement. Consulting engineers, for example, need professional engineers to sign off engineering drawings, but it's a lot more than that. And I'd like to share some of the bigger, larger context around why professional engineers have become so relevant now and going forward. So let me start with painting a bit of a picture around how I see the world happening, and the role of professional engineers in that space. For example, political leadership, and this is a global phenomenon, is sort of devolving into a populism tactic. We're seeing a lot of populist behavior centered around egotistical politicians, for example. So the balance of strategy and politics is not even any longer. And what's happening is there's a disconnect between politics and the ability of politicians to serve general society. Now, going forward, it's lobby groups such as SAICI and many others alike, together with perhaps academia, that are now able to position themselves to counter the argument around various other things that are happening to society, perhaps ignored by politicians, in favor of other agendas. Okay, and I think we all can relate to that to some extent. For example, I'll start with a quote by Albert Einstein. I like that quote because it says, we cannot use the same methodology to come out of a problem that we used to get in it in the first place. Okay, so it suggests that, and in keeping with previous practices, we are seeing that we need to do something different. We need to think different, and the difference is not small or incremental anymore. It's fundamental. And you'll hear comments around fundamental economic change, fundamental reform. What they mean is sweeping reforms, doing things like almost completely different. You've also heard words such as disruptive behavior, disruptive technologies, and the like. So it's coming around fundamental changes to systems that we are used to in the past. And now, even with COVID and the pandemic, exacerbating the issues around the need for change. And I'd like to, around that, present the story around the solutions that engineers can provide. Now, when I spoke about the balance, I spoke about political balance, I spoke about technology, but there's more of a complete story around balance. I think going forward, engineers need to really represent society, civil engineers. And by the nature of the term civil is we are civil servants. There's also geopolitical issues, international relationships, and we have a role to play in that as well, because we service clients in other countries as well. The South African civil engineering industry is a global industry, as much as we operate within the South African context. The understanding of Earth and Earth systems, climate change, environmental issues, sustainability is another concept that is being parked and dealt with at a political level. Now the upside of that is that it's dealt with at the highest level, which is a good idea. The problem is action is weak. So different countries are adopting different approaches to Earth systems and the understanding of Earth systems. Now, if we lean too much towards politics, we tend to ignore the Earth systems story, and we don't action that. So it's academics, again, lobby groups, etc., that are required to put the other part of the puzzle together with regard to Earth systems. Then we've got the techno-economics. Now, when I talk about techno-economics, I'm talking about technology and innovation. And I'd like to, to perhaps challenge those around the call to think about when last we actually, used anything innovative. And it's sort of counterintuitive because we tend to standardize just about everything we are doing. And the ability to be innovative, to custom thinking is falling by the wayside again. And I think that's one of the big picture ideas I'd like to put out to the team or the group that's looking out for professional engineer registration. It starts with becoming a professional engineer. It starts with being able to share your voice and be heard. And I think that's what I would encourage those looking to become professional engineers, to be those change agents, to be those lobbying, to be part of lobby groups, and to share that voice around these 4 criteria that I've just gone through. Now, the future firms, that will solve problems in the future, going forward, will have to incorporate all of these 4 different concepts that I've gone through in order to solve problems. Now, engineers, in my opinion, and professional engineers for that matter, are best poised for something like that because they have an understanding and an appreciation across all of these concepts and can understand and analyze across various disciplines. So they're well poised to solve problems in the future, but they need to be professionally registered. They need to be furthering their academic career. And, and for example, the future engineers might need 2 or even 3 PhDs to be able to comprehend the complexity that they sit with. So I encourage, starting with a professional engineer registration, I encourage much further academic study in various disciplines that cover a breadth of disciplines as well as depth. So I think that is why I encourage all engineers to register professionally as quickly as possible so that we can start the next part of the journey, and that is to solve problems that we are currently facing. More around the South African discussion, I think I'd like to just talk about the need for leadership. And for those of us that were part of the SIDS presentation announced by government last week, there's an admission that there's a lack of capacity. Now, the lack of capacity is sort of perhaps different, it's understood differently by different people. But in my understanding, we need professional engineers in all parts of the infrastructure delivery process. That means financiers, that means government or implementing agencies, that means construction and contractors, and that means consulting engineers as well, who are the biggest players in the provision of infrastructure. And we need all of those components to be equally and evenly capacitated. So the other challenge that we have as a country is that engineers need and subscribe to a code of ethics. I think ethics is one of our biggest challenges at this time. And being professionally registered means that you do subscribe to a code of ethics. And I think ethics is one of the biggest parts of being a professional engineer at this time. In other words, ethics in the way you give advice, ethics in the way you do your designs, ethics in the way you deal with your client, and the monies that are associated with all of these transactions. Overall, the COVID pandemic, and I can't leave this discussion without talking about that, it has brought about what they call an economic reset, which means we need to configure our economy to deal with 2 fundamental issues that have not been addressed in South Africa and the African continent. And that's the one of inclusiveness, economic inclusivity, as well as inequality. The African leadership has generally been criticized for being elitist. In other words, looking after a small group of people, whilst the masses are not included in the economy of the country. And I think now is a good time to actually participate in that discussion and demand that this be happening. And there's various methods to do that. One is lobbying. The other one is to be involved in the process of developing the regulations that are going to come and the amendments to the regulations. The other is to actually exercise that in the procurement and the standards that we use, and the manner in which we put out our opportunities to market, and how we appoint different service providers, and how we allow growth and participation. There are many mechanisms that we can be innovative about in addressing that. And again, it takes the professional engineer to lead the entity, to lead that kind of discussion, so that we all are able to at least say we've moved forward slightly in the inequality and the economic inclusivity discussion. I think that I'll stop there and perhaps and perhaps just have a little bit of a say with regard to labor that's coming up next. We all understand that the process to register as professional engineers has its hiccups and flaws, and we have many issues, perhaps by the participants that are on the call. I'd like us to agree that, that we talk positively about registration. I know there are challenges, and I have, on good accord from the Engineering Council that they are aware of the challenges and they are in the process of resolving that if they have not already done so. So I think let's make it a positive discussion. Let's look forward to how we would register as engineers and not make it a negative slander dialogue to EXA. Thank you very much.